Good afternoon, everybody. It's our Friday lunchtime webinar. Today we're talking about workplace romances, a cause for conflict. You're very welcome to join us. I see we have people on from all around the UK and around the world joining us for today's webinar. Just before we start, quick word about me. I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I run UK Mediation. Set this up now 23 years ago to deal with all kinds of interpersonal conflict, commercial conflict, conflict within families who are trying to stay together, workplace disputes, complaint scenarios, medical mediation. That's what we do. My background's in psychotherapy, and our organisation runs very much on the basis around the psychology of conflict. So looking at conflict and trying to understand conflict by understanding the people who are in conflict, and of course the people who are in conflict very much relates to today's topic, talking about workplace romances, people having more than just a collegiate relationship with the people that they work with and go into the office with each day. This is what we're going to be looking at today. So we have on screen a chat box. If you have any comments or questions as we proceed through the webinar today, which will be about 40 minutes long, then do please pop them in the chat box. I'll address them as we go, and I'll leave a bit of time at the end as well. The webinar will be available on our channel, our YouTube channel, and on the website after the event today, so you can share it with others or refer back to it later on. And there is a whole library of webinars that you can also look at. If you go to our website, you will find them there. So for today, looking at what we're going to be considering, we're going to think about, first of all, workplace romances. What's actually going on? What do we mean by this? And in time-honoured tradition, we'll be doing some statistics about workplace romances, and thinking about how this relates to mediation and conflict resolution. Where does conflict come into it, and where can it lead? What's the issue around workplace romances that might give rise to disputes or conflict, misunderstandings, fallouts within the workplace, and what are the consequences of this? And then, of course, where mediation comes in. So what do we need to know about mediation so that we can apply it to these scenarios? What kind of examples might we apply mediation to? And what actually can mediation offer? So what's the point of mediation? Something that we ask ourselves all the time here at UK Mediation, making sure that there is actually a case for getting involved with mediation, that there are good reasons to address it in this informal, confidential, impartial way, before things go more formal and go over the line where we have to actually investigate or take disciplinary or performance related action. So looking at what mediation can offer to situations that might arise on the basis of something that began as a workplace romance. So we're doing this today on the 11th of February, just before St. Valentine's Day, with our very attractive pink slides. So you may notice a bit of a theme going on here. So we are relating it, as we like to do, to the annual calendar here in the UK. So just in time for Valentine's Day, we're going to start talking about what workplace romances mean to us and what's actually going on. So quite often these things are kept private from other colleagues. Sometimes colleagues are not even aware that there's a romance going on in the office. Sometimes it's hard to know quite what's going on. But let's have a think about three things we do know about workplace romances. First thing we do know about workplace romances, especially on the basis of the many referrals that we get of workplace disputes here at UK Mediation, is that workplace romances do happen. So there's been a survey in 2020, which was retrospective because, of course, we were in lockdown for a lot of 2020, and so things were affected in that way. But thinking about, with a bit of a retrospective survey there from ZETI, 58%, so 6 out of 10 office workers surveyed have dated a co-worker. I think it's worth dwelling on that for a second. 6 out of 10 office workers have dated a co-worker. That's a very high figure. I imagine it's different across different industry sectors. We could speculate about which sectors may have more workplace romances, but looking at 1,000 office workers across a whole load of different sectors, ZETI found 58% of people have dated a co-worker. Surprisingly high figure. Second thing that we do know is that romances can go wrong. So when it goes well, of course, there's not a problem, and it's all very nice actually. But when things go wrong, we are looking at a figure of 35% of people in that same survey who, upon reflection of their workplace romance, thought that it was a bad idea. So 3 in 10 people, looking back, thought that it had been a bad idea to have this workplace romance in this survey, again, of 1,000 people. And the third thing I want to put in there about what we do know is that there can be consequences. In that, people felt that the workplace romance had a negative effect on their working relationship. There was 18% of those, so about 1 in 5 said that when they had that workplace romance, it had a negative effect on the working relationship. Presumably a lot of those were the ones that went wrong, not the ones that went right. And then another figure here is that there can be consequences, which is that about 12% of people, so what would we call that, about 1 in 8, said that they had quit a role because of a romantic relationship. That's 1 in 8. That's quite a high figure when you think about the cost of recruitment and induction and training, and when you're looking at staff, trying to increase staff retention. And of course, some of the business case for mediation is all about staff retention. But here, people had a romantic relationship. A significantly high proportion of those said that the relationship went wrong, and that with hindsight, it was probably a bad idea. And then ultimately, about 1 in 8 people quit a role because of a romantic relationship. So a few figures there, a few statistics that we like to put a little bit of a few figures in there on most of our webinars, and they're the figures around 3 things that we do know about workplace romances. So not a problem if it all proceeds tickety-boo and Valentine's cards gets exchanged and it's all out in the open and people are quite happy and cool about others having romances in the workplace. But sometimes conflict can arise. So let's have a think about, in the workplace romance scenario, where conflict might arise and where it might lead. So in particular, where the conflict arises is, of course, where the relationship ends in a bad way, and this gets acted out in the workplace. And I can think over the years of the many workplace disputes we've had referred that do involve a workplace romance. Quite often the problem is because it has finished and they act it out in the workplace. So they refuse to speak to each other in the workplace. There's the files thrown down on one another's desks. They cut each other out. They squabble in meetings. They draw other people in. And drawing other people in is a common thing whenever there's any conflict in the workplace, and this is no exception. So one group of people will side with one half of the workplace romance, and another group of people will side with the other half of the workplace romance. So other team members take sides, or they're accused of doing so, and this can really set colleague against colleague. You're on their side, no, you're on their side, no, but I'm not on his side, you're on his side. So we have accusations of siding with others, either based on reality or actually based on people's expectations. The awkwardness of the situation that can bring can lead to presenteeism or absenteeism. So people stay away from work because the atmosphere in the office is so toxic, or while they're there, there's a lot of gossip going on. There's texting under the table, there's people whispering in corners. It's a real distraction from work. So although people are actually there sat at their desks, they're not being particularly productive, which these days we would refer to that as presenteeism. So a few things there, which is where the conflict might start, is the ending of the relationship and the acting out, factionalism, and how this affects people at the sort of more individual or psychological level, where they just try and get away from the situation because it's a very difficult situation to address, or the awkwardness of it just means that people are just so distracted from their work that the things don't get done and the job's not getting completed. Where this can lead is, of course, in extremis. It may lead to people complaining about one another, complaining about their treatment, complaining about being cut out, complaining about how the ex that they work with is behaving towards them. And of course this can be very, very acrimonious. So you would get the couple who have split up, who still have to work together, going in turn to the manager or to the HR department to complain about the other one's conduct, possibly justifiably, but as far as the organisation's concerned, it's a very tricky one to deal with because they know where it comes from. So if there are behaviours that cross the line, of course, and go across what would be acceptable, any reasonable person might accept within a workplace in terms of proper conduct, then we do need to think about the more formal processes. This is where it can lead. Of course, I'll be saying more about where mediation should come in before we get into grievance and disciplinary, but and even when we get into factionalism and where one group cuts out another group or gang up against another group, or where we get divided into his camp and his camp within a workplace, or his camp and her camp, we would get problems around bullying and harassment allegations. So perhaps invoking your dignity at work procedure, perhaps invoking the misconduct processes when factionalism develops, because the behaviours can get pretty poor and certainly cross the line beyond what would be considered to be a positive working relationship. Where this goes, as far as the organisation is concerned, is that we might have to get into performance or capability processes for people who are very distractive or making excessive mistakes as a consequence of being one of the couple who has broken up, or of being somebody on the periphery who is affected by the behaviours of one or another of the couple who has broken up. So it will affect performance, it will affect capability, ability to concentrate, ability to do the job accurately and in a timely fashion. So that's where conflict can lead. That's how it might impact on individuals and on the organisation, and what kind of processes might be invoked. But the consequences of that can include we get distracted and lose productivity. Customer service can suffer. Certainly I can recall situations over the years where there have been complaints about the conduct of folks in customer facing roles because they have had a fallout, and employees of an organisation who've had a fallout have been quite brusque and quite rude and short with customers because of what's actually going on behind the scenes, and people leave. So you get worsened staff retention, and as I was saying, where the couple or people who are affected by the behaviours of the couple, where they're tugging the sleeve of HR and management, that takes up a lot of time of HR and management. And ultimately, if folks decide that it's intolerable and they have to leave that place of employment, or if they feel that they have been treated so badly within the workplace and it's not being addressed, or if there are issues around people's dismissal or reassignment that they're not happy with, we might end up in the employment tribunal. And this is what we need to avoid. So I said I'd come back to where mediation sort of comes in, so that we can, as part of our mission at UK Mediation, we're trying to help people to have more positive working relationships, trying to preclude the need for formal processes. We have a conflict resolution pathway, which we'll be very happy to tell you all about, to look at how better we can address relationship issues in the workplace, how you can preclude formal processes, how you can avoid having to go into these evidence-based adversarial win-lose processes. So thinking about all of those issues that can arise from workplace romances, and really where mediation comes in. So let's have a think about where mediation might be inserted in these processes, in this flow of a relationship starting in the workplace, a relationship maybe flourishing in the workplace and then maybe going wrong, and the kind of fallout that I've just been discussing when the relationship fails. Let's think about where mediation comes into that. So the idea, let's get straight down to it. What's mediation for? We hear a lot of talk about mediation, still quite a lot of myths and legends about mediation, about what it is and what it isn't. And part of what we do here is we educate people about how to make the best of these techniques, how to get the most out of mediation, how to build this into your processes, as I say, to preclude the formal, adversarial, evidential, past-focused, win-lose type processes, and how we can better address behaviours in the workplace, which is essentially where mediation comes in. Point one, really, is that we're looking for something like, between the couple, let's say, an acceptable behaviour contract, an ABC. So an acceptable behaviour contract, this is often the output from a mediation process, where the two parties come up with their own ideas for what we can do in order to behave in a way that's acceptable to one another, but also in a way that would be acceptable to other colleagues and to the organisation, so that we can all stay out of trouble, get the job done, not be distracted, minimise presenteeism, absenteeism, make sure people don't leave, and just try and get to a place where we are behaving in such a way that achieves all of those goals. So the output from mediation would be about an agreement, a voluntary agreement around behaviours. And even if people's feelings are still at odds, even if there is still some acrimony or unfinished business between the couple, at least then they would get to a place where they're not acting it out in the workplace. So they could deal with that in private or with a counsellor or trusted friend or whatever it has to be. But what the ABC would mean is that whilst they're within the four walls of the place of employment, they're behaving in such a way that's acceptable to them and to other people and to the organisation as a whole. Try and lessen the public acrimony. This is again the output from mediation, would to minimise the need for other people to feel like they've got to take sides or form factions. So the he said, she said, gossiping in corners, trying to get the ear of colleagues, get people to get on your side. These are the things that we need to avoid. And hopefully within mediation, so long as it's participated in good faith, and people want to do it and want to get to a point where they're taking the friction out of their interactions with their ex in the workplace, we can reduce that acrimony, the he said, she said, whispering in corners, so that other colleagues feel like there's less of a need to take factions and get into groups. And really within the mediation itself, what we're talking about, in essence, it's a process by which we set up the environment where they can have a robust private dialogue so that they can clear the air and get to the point where they can get on with their jobs. So we're not trying to be relationship counsellors, we're not trying to patch it up, but what we are doing is just giving an opportunity in a relatively quick, relatively inexpensive and certainly informal way so that the couple can have a decent dialogue, perhaps say some difficult things, but get to the point where they feel the air's been cleared, they can get on with their jobs and they're not going to continue to be distracted by this failed relationship. And just before I go on to the next slide, in the chat box there we've popped in a link for you about the conflict resolution pathway. So this is our mechanism for dealing with workplace disputes and avoiding formal processes at all costs. You're very welcome to have a click on there and see what we're talking about with our conflict resolution pathway. Okay, so that's where mediation comes in, and those are the problems we're trying to address. So let's have a think then about this idea of mediation being a cure-all. It isn't a cure-all, it's not a panacea. There are situations where mediation is not the right way to go, and I think it's, again, an important part of what we do here is helping people to decide when you do use mediation and when you don't use mediation. So it's not the right remedy in all cases. So let's have a think about when mediation should be used, and perhaps then we'll think about when mediation shouldn't be used. So the key thing we say to people quite often when something starts to go wrong at an interpersonal level between colleagues, be that around a failed relationship or ganging up or whatever it is, acting out in the workplace when a relationship has failed, think about doing it as soon as possible. As soon as conflict arises, don't hang about. Things get worse very, very quickly. So you want to make sure that we're getting in there early with mediation. Now, I've mentioned quite a lot about when the relationship fails, but actually the fact of a relationship going on in the workplace, a workplace romance, that can be disturbing and distracting to people. If you've got, to be blunt, if you've got a couple kissing by the photocopier, or sort of flirting in the workplace, or being perhaps more intimate than the workplace wishes to tolerate, that can be an issue for people. It's not the kind of behaviour we would expect to be exhibited overtly or excessively in the workplace. You know, being friendly and being affectionate is one thing, but there is a line. I think we have a reasonable notion about where that line is. And I'm just looking at the picture in the background on that slide there, the couple having a bit of flirty banter. You know, there is a point after which it becomes distracting or upsetting to other people. So it might be that we're using mediation before the relationship's broken down, perhaps while it's ongoing. So while the romance is ongoing, or if it's already ended, that's when mediation might be used. But mediation perhaps wouldn't be used Rather, here's how it should be used. So it should be used where people volunteer for it, they want to use it, they want to keep things private, and what we need to do is to get the mediator involved who's somebody impartial. It can't be somebody who's already involved, who's already been affected by the relationship. It's perhaps, if there have been any prior involvement with the HR department, it wouldn't be somebody from the HR department that already knows the individuals. It's got to be somebody who has the benefit of distance, the benefit of that perceived independence, perceived impartiality and separateness from the situation. So it feels like they're not taking sides and they have no particular vested interest in one or the other side's concerns or imperatives. So key things: voluntary, they have to want to do it; confidential, we've got to keep it private; and mediated by somebody who is impartial. So this could be an external mediator, or it might be an internal mediator with no connection to the parties. Okay, so what we're doing is we're rolling towards thinking about what the mediation process would look like. We're talking about some statistics there, things that we do know about workplace romances, about what can be the effect of in particular the workplace romance going wrong, but actually some things about when the workplace romance becomes a bit too overt or too conspicuously demonstrated in the workplace, and this can be distracting or upsetting to other colleagues. Think about getting mediation in early, whether the romance is ongoing or it's already ended, and thinking about the important building blocks of mediation: voluntariness, confidentiality, and the impartiality of the practitioner. So let's think about how this process works. The mediation process itself, where we would be starting with this, whether it involves just the couple, so to speak, or other colleagues, whoever it involves, the referral needs to come through HR or a local manager. There needs to be a single point of contact who says, okay, this situation needs addressing in an early and informal way by getting the two parties together privately and having a robust dialogue between the two. So a referral would begin through HR typically, or through a local manager, somebody who knows the situation and can help to get the mediation process set up. We would usually begin, well, we would always begin the process with individual meetings with each of the parties involved, be that the two sides of the couple or other work colleagues. If there has arisen any conflict between other people in the office, there can be a variety of situations here, but whoever's involved and whoever's part of the solution and who is involved in the conflict that has arisen hereby, we want to have individual meetings with each of them to identify what are the specific issues. So it's an important first stage in mediation. One of the myths and legends about mediation is we get people and shove them into a room and say, go on then, talk. But it's really important that we are, we do this with kid gloves, that we are, particularly with these kinds of issues, handling the situation sensitively, making sure we speak to people on their own and in private, see what's going on from people's individual perspectives before we think about getting people together. So individual meetings first, typically in the morning of a mediation day, and then typically in the afternoon of that mediation day we'd be looking at getting a joint session going between everybody involved. This might be 2 or more parties, of course. We need more than a day. If we were up to about 4 or 5 parties, we might need to go over into a day and a half, so that we can be sure we've met everybody individually, set up whatever groups or group we need to, so that we can get into this joint session where the aim is to build dialogue. We're looking at resolving differences, we're looking at restoring communication, we're looking at everybody working towards a written agreement with a set of resolutions or actions, something like the acceptable behaviour contract that I mentioned earlier. A voluntarily entered into agreement about how we're going to conduct ourselves differently. Okay, so that's the bare bones of the mediation process and how we would apply it to the sort of disputes that may arise from an ended workplace romance or the fallout with other people in the office of an ongoing or ended workplace romance. And just before we go on, we've got a good question here from Catherine by email. Thank you, Catherine, who says, I think it can be very difficult to see where the line is between being friendly and it being flirty banter, which can be inappropriate. What would Mike's advice be? I think it's a good question, Catherine. I think it's It is a matter of judgment, and it's a matter of how it affects other people in the office. If other people feel awkward, if they feel embarrassed, if they think there's too much of it, or it's gone too far into language that might be sexualized, or language that's very personal to do with people's appearance, or inappropriate touching, standing too close, perching on each other's desks. You know, I think we can apply a test of reasonable judgment here. What would any reasonable person adjudge to be over that line? So being friendly is one thing, but the flirty banter, I think, is where others are putting their heads down or walking away, or suddenly finding a piece of paper to walk around with, because they're trying to avoid the conversation that's going on between the two lovers. So yeah, interesting question, Catherine. I think it's a matter of judgment. It depends, but we apply the test of any reasonable person, I think. Very good. Okay, let's move on to thinking about the bare bones of the mediation process is there. Thinking about referral, individual meetings, a joint session, and then the output of the mediation process being some kind of an ABC or written agreement where there is a set of resolutions or actions or behaviours that will change as a result of the mediation and as a result of the two people getting a good understanding of each other, perhaps clearing the air. The detail of that you can find on that link there that's just appeared on our website. Retalk is our own model of the interpersonal mediation process, and describes there on that part of the website, it describes how our mediation process actually works in a bit more detail. But of course our case managers would be pleased to speak to you if you have a particular situation and you're curious about whether mediation might work. You're very welcome to ring us in confidence and talk it through. So let's think about what mediation can actually offer then. What are the outputs, what are the selling points of mediation? And sometimes we do have to give people a bit of encouragement to take part. Very careful the encouragement doesn't trip over into cajoling people into mediation or suggesting there might be any negative consequences to them not taking part. If people take part reluctantly in mediation, it generally doesn't work. And we know from experience that when people are sent to mediation and don't really want to be there, they will sit there with arms folded, not participate, and the process doesn't really get off the ground. So make sure we have the voluntary participation, make sure that we are encouraging and not cajoling. And we may need to think about sort of selling points really for how to encourage people into mediation. So really what we're offering here is an informal and early resolution process. So it's something that is offered discreetly at a low level. Within the confidentiality and the informality, we don't have any note-taking, we don't have any minutes, we don't have advocates or representatives or supporters there. So the two parties attend on their own and speak for themselves. One or two exceptions, but generally speaking, that's how it progresses in 99% of cases. So it's done in an informal way, no retention of notes, no writing reports, no detailed feedback to the organisation from the mediator. So we keep it private, we keep it low level, we keep it insulated from the formal processes like dignity at work, performance processes, grievance processes. This is intended to preclude the need for formal measures. So what we're doing is something informal or pre-formal, is a word I quite like, pre-formal. So that we don't need to use those other rather more destructive methods where people feel quite disempowered, they feel as if they've been judged, they feel arbitrated and told who's right and who's wrong. That's specifically what we want to avoid, and in that regard what we're doing is making sure the parties come up with the resolution. It's up to them to decide what happens. Again, within the bounds of reasonableness and within the bounds of what's permissible within the workplace. We can't have people making unlawful agreements, and we must be sure that the negotiation process is a fair one, that the two parties contribute to equally in order to come up with their resolution and to give it a sense that nobody has won or lost. So not only do we have a situation there where the solution's not imposed on them, it's they who've come up with it, but we also have this situation where it feels like they both walked away with more than they started with. So we could call it a both gain situation, is a buzz phrase I've heard. Nobody winning or losing, but both parties gaining from the conversation that they have. The particular benefits of it are that it's a private environment with an independent mediator, and that as such, because we've got the setting just right so that people can speak freely, really say what's on their mind, talk about the workplace romance that may be ongoing or may have failed, or if it's involving other colleagues in the office, talk about the impact on them of seeing this couple either canoodling by the photocopier, or seeing this couple trying to draw in factions and to carp on about one another because the relationship's failed, or even to have, you know, shouting matches and files thrown down on desks, doors let close in one another's faces. That can really impact on other work colleagues. It gives everybody a chance to really get to the heart of the matter, to give an open and honest account of how they've been impacted either by the ongoing workplace romance or by the failed workplace romance, whether they are somebody who's involved in it or they're just on the periphery being affected by it. Okay, that is sort of what I want to say about workplace romances and where mediation gets involved. We have used mediation in a lot of situations over the last 23 years, by goodness, and all the referrals we've had. Often there are situations of romantic involvement with people who get into workplace disputes. So let's have a think. Any questions, any comments? Let's address this one from Nathan. Nathan, thanks very much. 2 of my team used to have a romantic relationship outside of work. It ended in a bad breakup and it's starting to affect the team. Okay, what can be done here? Well, all the above, Nathan. So, quiet word first. I think the quiet word's really important. Door closed, confidential. You don't need to be making notes or keeping things on the record. Have a word with both parties if their conduct is affecting the workplace in any way. If it's affecting the team and the team members are coming to you saying, look, I can't handle this, you know, these two have fallen out, and now they're stamping around, having shouting matches in meetings, cutting each other out, doing BCCs on emails, etc., etc. You know, it's worth having a quiet word. Open and honest conversation with everybody involved. Even short of mediation, Nathan, what you might be thinking about is having a facilitated conversation. So again, it's in our conflict resolution pathway. The idea of initially a quiet word with everybody involved in private, and then a facilitated conversation. So we don't even have to use the M word. We don't have to call it mediation at all. It's just getting people around the table in the office with the door closed, private office with the door closed, giving everybody a chance to speak and respond. As facilitator, if you chose to take this role, making sure that everybody gets a fair chance to contribute and a fair opportunity to respond, to say how they are being impacted by the situation and what they need to happen differently, and make that conversation happen. Facilitation just means making it easier. So it's ensuring that there's a fair future-focused conversation, but that gives people a chance to outline the impact of others' words and behaviours on them. And this is right at the heart of mediation and at the heart of the sort of psychological approach to mediation that we use, is ensuring that people have a chance to tell others the impact of their words and behaviours. And we can do that within a facilitation model as well. Give people a chance to describe how they've been affected by what other people do and say, and put their heads together to share the responsibility to move on and make an action plan for what they're going to do differently to avoid those problems from reoccurring. So I hope that's helpful, Nathan. It's a tricky situation to deal with, no doubt about it, but perhaps get people together. And with everybody who's on today, if you've got specific cases that you want to chat through, you're very welcome to get in touch with us. Have a chat with the case manager about what can be done and whether mediation is the right way to proceed. So that's pretty well what we've got for today. Let's just have a think about some upcoming events. I was mentioning earlier about, you know, why we use mediation: saving time, distraction, avoiding formal processes. There's also a strong business case for mediation in terms of costs, and it's not difficult to put a cost on a formal grievance process or formal disciplinary process. Certainly not difficult to put a cost onto a tribunal process if things go that far. So there is a business case for mediation, and that's what we'll be talking about on our webinar in March, on Friday 18th of March, looking at clarifying the process and how it can help organisations in different ways, and the selling points for mediation, I guess, is what we'd call it. We may go into the figures But in particular, there are benefits around staff retention, engagement, and so on and so forth. And excitingly, now that we are able to get together in groups in hired public venues, that's exactly what we're going to do. We've got 2 showcases scheduled. What these are live demonstrations of the mediation process in action. So we will be enacting in a forum theatre kind of way the mediation process from the start to finish, with a dramatised dispute between 2 work colleagues. And those 2 work colleagues will be meeting a mediator in front of your very eyes in the 2 venues we've got lined up for you. So you'll see the parties involved in a dispute, bit of background, and then what happens when they actually meet the mediator, the process of the individual meetings, kind of conversation that takes place. Lots of opportunity for questions so that you can sit and watch the mediation, and live you can ask the mediator questions. You might choose to ask the parties questions about why we do mediation in the way that we do. So we've got 2 of these coming up right round the corner, one in Manchester and one in London. And I've got one last question to address as well from Tara. Thank you, Tara. If the mediator is internal within the organisation, would it be appropriate for them to hold the couple accountable to the agreement or line management? Okay, good question, Tara. Thank you for that. No, the mediator, their role is very clearly defined, and there has to be a really clear boundary around what the mediator's role is, which is not to be part of the line of command, not to be the an agent for HR, but to be an independent and impartial body who comes in, really only meets the parties on the day for the first time, does the mediation, leaves them with their agreement, and then goes away without feeding back to the organisation, or without being involved in ensuring that the couple follow their agreement. That's down to them first, and then if they choose to share their agreement with local management or HR, there would be some encouragement from management and HR to stick to their agreement, and if they don't, there may indeed be consequences to that, but that wouldn't be anything to do with the mediator. So the mediator is there to begin their input only on the day of the mediation and conclude their input at the point at which they walk out the mediation room on that day. What we do, and what a lot of organisations do, is we would follow up after 6 weeks. So that would be the only additional involvement, would be following the mediation process a few weeks later, get in touch privately with each of the parties, by email usually, and say, how's it going, has the agreement worked? And if they have feedback, we get their consent to feed that back to the organisation. But it would not be the job of the mediator to enforce the agreement, no. Okay, so in terms of the showcases, 2 things I want to say about that just before we finish for this afternoon. First one is that the dates and times is Thursday 7th of April. We are going to be in London at our lovely venue down there in the afternoon to do the mediation showcase. So Thursday 7th of April. Do come along, do share the link that we've just popped up in the chat box there, so you can register for the showcases there. Go to the website and look for events and come along and join us. Numbers are limited. There's just a room size, basically, a limit on how many people you can get in the room and still be suitably distanced. And then we're doing it again the following week up in Manchester, again in the afternoon on the Thursday the 14th of April. And again, you can register, or if you want to share that link, if anybody else wants to come along, bring 2 people from your organisation, that'd be great. Come and meet members of our team, see a mediation in action, actually enacted in front of you, get a chance for some questions and discussion around our mediation model and how you might build it into your own processes. Okay, that's what we're doing. So I hope that's been of interest to you today, talking about workplace romances and mediation and conflict. We love to keep in touch with you, so check out our YouTube where you will find this webinar, of course, and lots of other webinars. You can like and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter. You can check out our LinkedIn and connect with us if you wish, and look at our Facebook as well. So that's how you can keep in touch with us. Thanks ever so much for your questions and comments today, and for your attendance, and wish you the best of luck. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.